Rose with the rest as dawn's pinking paled through the gaps in the trees. Haze briefly perfumed with a glow, now turning with the crash of heavy day, pouring the suffocating soup of a summer arriving once again too soon. Jeremiah, you coming today, or? Jeremiah looks down at his dusted pallet before he answers the voice a tree or two away. A winter coat, stiff and thin as cardboard with a decade's sweat and mud. Sog-soft cowboy boots, weathered to withers, bunched together well enough to act as a pillow. Got a real duvet for a top sheet, rescued weeks ago from an apartment complex's dumpster. Jeremiah grumbles. Voice growls like a 72-ounce styrofoam cup, full half up with quarters and shaken. I don't reckon, no. Not today. I've got to... And he motions toward his sleeping pile. Got to clean up, maybe. Alright, well, you want us to bring you back something or anything? Jeremiah's already turned away from the source of the voice, looks out into the forest, catch the last moments of morning's glorious blush, smell the soil waking up, blooms of honeysuckle kicked off their feet by the rank nastiness of dogwood, sweet rot from below, all of it though, all of it kept tight and quiet and low by the morning's final breeze off the lake, the last sigh of night, cool and calm and just good enough to have Jeremiah forgetting for a breath that today marks 3 days since he's last eaten. Jeremiah, you listening? You want us to bring you back something from down in town or anything? We all got to get to stepping before it gets as hot as it's gonna be. I'll be fine. Stomach kicks. A squirrel dehibernating. Impatient little thing. Alright then, brother. Alright. So they get to stepping. Dragging their ragged feet through the loam and leaf, following the rough path they've stomped over the past week and change. Never stay in one part of the woods long enough for the environment to grow up around them, take their structure into its consideration, leave it all leveled in their wake, freshly flattened for new growth. Too much risk in staying put. It's common knowledge among the townsfolk that Jeremiah and his vagrant ilk have been camping in these woods and in the off-season on the Grouseland tract itself for years and years and years. They closed down the shelters a decade and a half ago or so back, and if city police catch a fella sleeping on the sidewalk, they're just as likely to arrest him as they are to drive him out into the middle of nowhere and kick him to the shoulder. So the unhoused brought themselves nowhereward. Every day they rise with the sun, their instinctive diurnality uncorrupted by the slant rhythms of university town life. Once risen, they descend to the bustle. Some in Jeremiah's little cluster have jobs in landscaping or even in construction. Some are in recovery. Most, though, are on their way out, back into the throes that first threw them, and must get to town early enough to get in line to stave off the terminal pitch. All of them, even the employed, do hours of panhandling each day. All to say, as their footsteps fade away, that Jeremiah garners no pleasure from having kept them waiting for him with his silence and grumbling. Can't bear the thought of it all. The town, the people, food, and water. Not on a morning as delicate as this. Sooner or later, it's all going to crash. Even those who have forsaken themselves of the world, uncogged from the grand grist mill, will be caught and killed in the grinding halt of the machine's failure. fog's fallen by the time Jeremiah gathers gumption enough to trek the 20 yards of bosque between his pallet and the lake. No longer are lacy carnation-colored nymphs floating over the face of his father's final lasting achievement. The surface of Lake Michael is black and motionless on this windless morning. At its edges, where Jeremiah's horn-crusted feet soak submerged over a bed of algae-slick pebbles, the lake's wrinkling weak streams of white sunlight razoring into Jeremiah's eyes, rendering him progressively blind to his wavering reflection's face. Looking up and away from the shimmer, Jeremiah searches the pockets of his fishing vest, the trusty garment he'd not been without since he first fell from the commonest graces of hearth and home. With a hard resined roach he remembers hiding away before draining the dregs of his 40 and slipping to sleep. As he digs, hopping clod-fisted pocket to pocket, his belly growls another jewel-jowled beg. It's difficult to keep the body in check. Hardest part keeping the fleshy ape away from the soul's controls. Nothing can be done about the greater world that's held in much larger hands, but this sopping mess the heart's piloting has got to be kept in line. So starve it of everything now and again, and again, and again, and now found it. Rolls the roach between his thumb and forefinger, loosening the bud from the buildup. Enough punch there in the paper for one teensy drag, enough to make a morning, enough to forget himself for the water. The lighter is easier to find, always in the same breast pocket. Flame to paper, paper to lip, smoke to lungs, and in a puff the little bug is spent. The small high rises and Jeremiah peels off his clothes. Fishing vest comes away from shoulders to be folded flat over a rock tabling out of the shadows. Next the t-shirt, a threadbare souvenir from Grouseland State Park, printed with the profile of a black-braided native and the slogan, "A place for peace." Been clung to his skin since his last swim. Comes away with an audible tear. Off now, Jeremiah's pallid flesh is greeted by a sun angrier than it ought to be. He welcomes its gold, free to fry as much as it desires. The camouflage cargo shorts fall next. Something paler, more the failure, hangs still in the air. The first time he was naked, truly naked, not as at birth surrounded by machines clothing the air with their hums and beeps, nor is it defloration crammed into the back seat of a father's sedan, or behind a dumpster in an alley, or quietly grunting in a basement, nor any of the other everydays where the body is freed but the world made stays solidly in play. First time he was truthfully naked was 3 weeks after he tipped his John boat in the center of this slate-still lake to see if the bottom of it was far enough down. Lissa May, rest her soul if there is one, had stayed up all into the night with him, well past the baggies' last little bits, coming down and talking everything to pieces around the dwindling embers of their campfire. She'd taken him the minute the last of the light went out, when the night around them was blued and full by the moon before the horizon cracked open again. Silver-white slashes of sun now sliced the whole of Jeremiah's reflected body, cutting him up as if to illustrate the miracle of corporeality in this obvious void. The water is kind around his ankles, and, the tiny high hitting the heights of its rise, his ankles are kind in turn to the water. He takes a step deeper, a step deeper, a step deeper until the surface has risen to his belly, the weight of the lake pressing in where there is nothing at all to push it back. Know from experience that this is where the ridge lies, water up past his waist, and the rest of the lake pits and falls away deep, deep to the memory of its flooded holler. Any further out and he'll have to swim. So with a sinking lunge, Jeremiah dips his crackle-crusted beard into the water and pushes off the pebbly bottom, into the dark under the surface. There was a moment, right after he flipped the John boat, after a finger of the lake had made its way up a nostril, that he thought that maybe he should have at least called into work, let them know he wasn't going to make it in ever again. But the bottom couldn't be that far down. Daddy couldn't have managed to drown that much in reality. Once the lake is full around him, once his hair is wet and his chest heaves a heft heavier, Jeremiah turns over on his back and floats. There's no current, save for what the lazy carp and catfish can stir. Papa never managed to put in the pump, never managed to plumb it toward the city to render it reservoir. So the slightest heel kicks will take him as far as he needs to go. The center, the opposite shore, back to his piled clothes. It should all be effortless from here. From above, he is a tear in a sheet of black satin, steadily threading and threatening to sever the implacability in two. The water's in his ears, humming something cetacean. It climbs capillary through his beard to line his lips. It tastes vegetal, of algae and all those drowned trees. Mineral, like sand or concrete. The finer details of the operation were never conveyed to him. Remembering his father's face, the few times Jeremiah had gotten a straight look at it in the twilight of his last mayoral term, fallen with age and disgrace, sagging under the invisible weight of failing the people's faith, a sapphire joy, though, buried in his eyes, gleaming satisfaction of an aged man having gotten his way. Jeremiah doesn't imagine the finer details were something his father thought about very much, once the plan was in place and the land out from under its ownership. A big feat to move all this water. Time and effort's all anything's ever taken, his father'd say. Time and effort, and you move the whole world an inch, a mile, hell, put out the sun if you want to. Time and effort trickled the water in, rerouted from a tributary somewhere north and nearer the state line before it could kiss in with the runoff thickened way of Domino Creek. Wet gave to rise, and soon enough the valley's slopes were populated with gawkers watching over weeks as the glittering shoreline swallowed goat pastures and apple groves, storage sheds, and soon enough a white-sided farmhouse perched on a soft, shady promontory. Your daddy ain't done nothing, Bliss had said after snorting the last clump. She looked up at the stars, sniffing back the drip. Didn't make the lake water, did. Your daddy ain't done nothing. Whatever they were snorting, it wasn't blow. Shit burned different. The hide didn't increase the frequency and volume of thoughts, but instead scrambled the signals, bleeding pixel and fuzz across frame and frazzling all the borders, every idea lost to the image of another, swallowed and digested to so much shit. No, he told them to, water did, listen, no. And that's when she scooched and got up close to him, right to where he could smell her, smell the dirt, the cheesy grease of the unwashed, the history he'd yet to live. She put her hand on his thigh and said, the water and the land or whatever, they did it, they made the lake. Your daddy ain't done nothing because, look, the land was already ready for flooding. Always made for it because it could be filled in the first place, because that's how it was made, and that's what water does, goes where it'll stay, right? So all the land needed to be a lake was to have the water in it enough to fill it enough to be like, look, your daddy ain't done shit, but at the moment of breaking, boat flipping and sending down everything that filled it, the water became inevitable. There was panic, sure and honest panic. Even if it had been on purpose initially, even if Jeremiah could remember taking the day off to go fishing, to find the bottom, to at the very least never go back to work, the minute he hit his father's water, the animal inside kicked his legs for him and had him splashing against whatever will toward stillness he'd had. It's got to be quieted, that stubborn animal inside so bent on life. It's got to be quieted, though not to make dying easier, but to clarify the distinction between living and dying, to draw the actual differences against each other. The animal, hungry and thirsty and totally without reason, sees all things other than now as death. If it looked from the other side of the void toward life, it would place its fear there in the light and call it darkness. This is not the way of things, and if it is, what more hope could there be than gilded nil? So Jeremiah fought against the splash and kick, and even in a moment of minor heroism against the will to breathe. Emptying his lungs with a foamy blast, he sank. Every breath now holds him afloat. Every exhale, and his belly falls below the surface. Without the inhale, heart calm, Jeremiah knows where he'll go. Down, death below. The lake was still and green, no sound save for those made before dying. He wasn't dying, not yet then, though his lungs ached to be filled and his heart raced. Not yet dying then, still a minute or two away, sinking, the lake weighed heavier with every foot he fell. The water around him felt as stone, pebbling his joints, lungs fire, and heart a crumbling brick of salt. Jeremiah's eyes opened and held before him an endless forest. And she tasted of earth, every moment of her. Tongue shot into his mouth like a lump of wet clay, her calloused hands with rows of tendons like piles left behind a plow, fingertips stained rusty with blood and nicotine dug fierce into his shoulders. Jeremiah found himself on the ground, head hitting hardpack, Lissa burying him beneath her, kisses and falling rocks, slate dark teeth gnashing in the night, cloth coming away in shreds, the quivering of his skin in the moonlight. She bit his lip at some point, his mouth filled with blood. It dripped from her as she rose from the kiss she'd found her to find him inside of her. Blood and shimmers from her chin, down her neck, breaking out in creaks over the quake-wrought hardness of her body. Granite or marble or Something older, a stone of stones, the conglomerates that build mountains, the myriad rates of wear and weather, cleavage and luster, crystal and grain, a multitude of unwavering stillnesses and tremor toward cinders. Felt like she was going to break something, a wrist or whole limb at the very center of him, as her pelvis ground and ground, stretches where neither of them were breathing, aches building in their muscles, all softness petrifying. It starts in the left ankle, a little quartz worm of pain, before exploding out and up his calf. The left heel won't kick anymore, so the rest of his leg takes it. But the pain is there too, finds its way up his hip and locks it in lactic cement. Jeremiah's belly backflips, and a gasp catches cough as his abdomen heaves. A gout of black water fills his throat. The gagging exhale, sput and bubble, both legs locked now, and Jeremiah sinks. In the water, his eyes open, the submerged forest and valley slopes are nowhere to be seen. In the black of life drowned and steeped for decades, there is nothing to be seen, nothing to be felt but the pang of an empty belly. Life and death are the open spaces on either side of pain. Only one plane guarantees no return to agony. Thanks, guys.